Hi, welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your consciousness transformation and ascension guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. This week I wanted to talk about there's the idea of, am I right or am I wrong? Like, who's right and who's wrong? This is like an age-old question in terms of especially the active spiritual path, when we are pursuing the remembrance of higher consciousness. And what happens is, it's interesting. We do all this stuff to break ourselves of the habits of being, being closed-minded or in a certain way or in low vibration or whatever. And then we don't even realize that we still get stuck in the ego in terms of like deciding who's right and wrong, or deciding the judgment, or, and it is a judgment when we say what's right and wrong. And so part of what I teach and what I talk about a lot when I teach Trinity Energy Progression and all my other classes and meetups and all that kind of stuff has to do with right and wrong. So we have this whole consciousness, right? This divine consciousness in the multiverse. And the interesting, so if we looked at it this way, is when my kids were younger, I used to try to explain it to them this way, the way I understand it, which is, so like there is a consciousness at the cell, at the atom level, right? And there's consciousness in molecules and atoms and molecules, and then we keep on getting up into clumps and groups of things, right? So our cells have consciousness, our organs have consciousness, our mind has consciousness, and then it sort of gets concentric from there, as I understand it. So we get to that wholeness. It's the incorporation of all consciousness of the multiverse, which is what many consider God, source, whatever. So that's how I understand it. And when we look at separation, when we look at duality and how we exist, like we created this separation, or this like sort of a partition, I call them, so we can reflect back to ourselves to see what that is and sort of learn what that perception of separation is like. So we have this multiverse of all kinds of separations, all kinds of levels of that, and one of the very personal ones to us is within the body. So when we get into separation, that's what we mean by duality. And we mean like there's if for everything there is an equal and opposite thing, right? That's because there's this reflection back. So that's where good and bad come from, and right and wrong, or the perception of good and bad and right and wrong, and or good and evil, or light and dark, and all that kind of stuff. So when we're looking at stuff from that perspective, we're actually looking at it from the perspective of within the perspective of duality, versus looking at it from that whole of divine consciousness. So part of the fun of us being in these individual bodies has to do with, or these individual souls, is that we've had all these costumes. We're the writers, the producers, the players, and the play. And not just here, all over the multiverse. And so we get into this place of filtering our perception based on our individual experiences, which is part of what I call the game. And so when we do that, we sort of lose perspective of the bigger picture. And that's what we've really gotten ourselves ingrained in, embodied here within the body and density. Because the more dense we get, the more we forget the wholeness, right? The more dense we insert parts of our consciousness, the more we forget the rest of our consciousness. So when we talk about this, and I'm going through this because it gets to the point pretty quickly of, so when we see things from the filter of our individual journeys, we see them through the filter of our individual journeys, right? So if you and I see the color red, you and I are going to have two very different perceptions of what red is. So like I might think of red as love and passion and vibrant joy, and you might think of red as angry and bloody and and dark. So who's right? We both are in our own perspectives. And so what happens in the whole world of active spiritual journeying is that we get into this practice of, like, we've been in the practice in the embodied and without even being on the active spiritual journey. I mean, we're always on a spiritual journey. But when we get to this place of saying who's right and who's wrong, those are always filters based on an individual's journey. So we can believe what other people tell us. We can decide on our own, like we can judge. So here's the thing. Some people, some cultures think that killing somebody or letting somebody kill themselves because they're about to die or they're dying or whatever, that's a bad thing. And some cultures say, well, let them go, let them go out into the woods and let themselves go. There's so many different ways of, and so like who's right and who's wrong. We sit here and judge like who has a lot of material things and who doesn't, and we think that's right and wrong or good and bad. And yet, they've done these sociological studies that have shown that many people in what we call third world countries have the happiest lives of anybody because they have much simpler lives, and they're much more connected in the heart and with others because they're not lost in their material things, right? So, but yet those of us who live in materialistic societies, industrialization and all that kind of stuff, we have these perceptions of like how much you own and what you own and whatever that causes happiness, or how much money you have or don't have, but that's our judgment based on, say, a mass consciousness judgment from this kind of society. So these are just quick like examples of those kind of judgments, right? What's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, right? So some people would say, oh, but like the more things I have and the better things I have, that's good. And then the less things that somebody has, or that if they're poor or whatever, that's bad. But yet when, like I said, when we look at what we consider those judgments, like in different cultures, some of them are happier with far less than those of us in industrialized countries. So these are, like I said, really quick examples of when we judge something, and it's always based on our individual filters, right? So we then transfer that over onto the spiritual journey. We transfer it over to how we look at the information that we get and understand. And we go from this place of gathering information. Now, by the way, what we are in the habit of doing is we get this information before we're really conscious of it. We get this information. We allow others to tell us what to think. We allow others to tell us what to look at, what's important, what's not important, right? We listen to our parents, our peers, our preachers, our teachers, our families. And so then we have these deeply embedded set of beliefs and practices and habits where we're deciding that something is good or bad based on what other people have told us, and accepting that as our own in terms of that it must be bad or good because of what others have told us, of what doctrine has told us, or whatever. So, excuse me, I have a cat over here playing with the plant. Hey, Freya, excuse me. She's eating my plant. So when we get to this, so we get into the spiritual mode, and then we start, instead of like, because then we decide on our individual filter what's right and what's wrong. So we say that some practice that somebody's doing is wrong and mine is right. That's how it always is, right? Or this expert who's written 50 books, they must be right because they wrote 50 books and I must be wrong. Or this other person must be wrong because they didn't write any books. So we make these judgments, and we keep on going, and we keep on adding on like all these layers as we think, oh, well, that person must be right. Hold on a second. Hey, stop. Sorry. So when we start to really become active on the spiritual journey, we get inundated with information where, we have so many people wrote books, so many people who are, like talking on live streams and podcasts and all that kind of stuff, or up at the pulpit, or, you know, in our communities and our families and all that kind of stuff. Since we're so used to listening to who tells us what's right and wrong, we start to like make judgments and accept those things within our own value system of right and wrong and good and bad and stuff like that. But what happened, so we stay in this habit of doing the same thing we did before we started becoming more consciousness, but we put it under the label of being more conscious. But now I'm judging you with more consciousness, which I think is really funny. So the really important part here is, like, I sit in conversations with others that are on their active spiritual journey of all different kinds of practices and stuff. And I've heard this happen, and this happens a lot. And I heard this happen earlier this week, where you have one person talking about one thing, and another person then tries to define it based on their own filter, saying, you know what, what you really mean is this. Like, I hear what you're saying, and this is how I understand it. And the way it's implied is, well, that means that it's right and you're wrong, or I'm more right than you are, right? And then like you have like this whole circular thing that starts to happen. And then somebody else says, oh yeah, and but what about this? Or no, that's not right, or this is more like what you need to look at. And then we start putting these words in, like need, should, have to, can't. Those are all egoic filter terms that have to do with our own opinions and subjectivity. So we always get into this, like, should I, shouldn't I? Is this good or bad? Or is this the right thing? And I hear that all the time. It's like, oh, should I take this class? Should I like follow this person? And then it's funny how then it becomes there's spiritual materialism. There's that term. There's spiritual hierarchy. Like, we throw hierarchy in there too. When the thing is, if we're truly on this, well, not if, as we are truly on this path to get to that place of higher to get to that, remember that place, remember that we're already there, remember our higher consciousness, and remember our connection and part of as the wholeness, and that whole consciousness, that there is no right, that right and wrong is all and judgment is all based in that duality and separation. So when we look at the whole picture, it's like, well, are you learning the lessons you need to learn so that you do take the next step to opening to that remembrance, and then taking that information from within, taking steps toward realizing that it's your higher self, that we're getting all of our answers from within, that it doesn't have to come from others. Somebody who's written 50 books, somebody who's up at the pulpit, somebody who's, an esteemed professional. I've had so many people come to me or have like group discussions, and that people are very like reticent to add in their perception or understanding because they feel like intimidated. Other people are far more advanced than them, all that kind of stuff. But then, talk to them one-on-one, and they're like, well, I sort of understood this way. And I'm like, yeah, that feels great. That actually feels really right on. But then they felt like so intimidated because the others around them were more certified acting professionals or whatever. We're all on the same journey to remembrance. We're all having the different filter that's really important for us to complete in the experience so that we come to that place of whole remembrance. And from that place of whole remembrance is when we realize that it's all right. It's all right. All journeys are perfect. They're perfect for the lessons that we decided that we wanted to learn within the journey. And so can we change them? We can, if we're guided to, and that's where the whole dependence on inner guidance comes. And not only the dependence, but real trust and faith in it, because above everything else, you have the answer. And many don't listen to this. Many pretend, or not pretend, they do like a little bit, but then if somebody else like comes across as much more authoritative, they believe them over their own guidance. And I've seen that happen. And people that I've trained and journeyed progression, which is all about working from divine guidance, existing in divine guidance and divine consciousness as the wholeness, being that, and doing from the wholeness instead of an individual, the individual perception only. But I've had people who are really, really advanced in this, and then they go like they are doing great listening to their inner guidance. They're shifting their lives, and then they go to something like a channeling, or they go to some kind of other thing that's a psychic meeting or whatever. And then somebody else tells them, oh, no, you need to be doing this. You should be doing this. And then they think, oh, well, then I must have it wrong, because that person obviously knows what they're talking about because they do this like professionally, or people pay to see them. So, oh, they must be right. And I have to go and I have to override my own internal guidance to listen to what they're saying, because now I don't trust or believe that I have the answer for me. And then what happens is it gets all tripped up, and then they come to me and they're like, I don't understand what happened. And I'm like, well, maybe this was a test for how much trust you have in your inner guidance. And then usually the answer is like, oh yeah, I can see that. But that's the key. We get caught up in things like, I listen to my guides, and my guides tell me this. And we use that, by the way, as like, it's always like a trump card when you say, oh, well, yeah, my guidance was this. Oh yeah, well, my guides tell me this, as implying that guides have more information than we have. And the guides are really just another mirror of ourselves, just a different face, in a way that we can understand the message from our higher self in a way we need to understand it in the moment. So it's just another facet of ourselves. We're all part of that same consciousness. That would be the same kind of thing. So the answer, that's the long answer to the short question, is like, who or what is right or wrong on the active spiritual journey, is we're all right. We're all on the perfect path for us. And the key is really to get to the place of more and more faith and trust within our inner guidance and what the higher self is telling us, over everything else, over what it looks like in the 3D, even if some people might call it crazy. Like, many people will judge it. And I always tell people, it's none of your business what other people think of you, because what they think of you is where they are. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with you. We do a lot of things based on judgment, or we think we're right or wrong based on the judgment of others. And so really what I'm here to say is, go within, get into the practice of starting to really listen to you over everything else. And yeah, there's a bunch of retraining that comes with that. There's a bunch of rehabituation that comes with that. That's what meditation is about, and clearing all the chatter of the ego. And the ego is based in the energy and the emotion of identity. And it's not bad, but that's just what habit it has been in, because that's the job we gave it, was to explore identity and separation. So all the things the ego talks about or thinks about or whatever is all about thought, word, and deed having to do with separation and identity. And when we're remembering how to exist from wholeness, then we shift to exist from that different space, that we can override the ego, that we can tell the difference pretty easily, because it's not a should, have to, it must and can't. There's no anger, there's no fear, there's no pain. It's only, this is how it is. And many times when we're first like learning to do this, and I'll tell you, there are people who've been doing this in the profession for years and decades or whatever, that are still practicing getting to that point, because, we're all on these individual journeys, and it's all correct. It's just that, is it correct for you? Because everybody's journey is individual to themselves. And so an answer for me is not necessarily going to be an answer for you in the way that serves your journey. When I work with somebody doing energy work, or whatever you want to call it, consciousness work together, I am committed to giving somebody just a message that they're to get, without trying to translate it. Now, this is really interesting, because this is one of the big things that there's a lot of balking against. Teaching others to remember how to just relay a message without translating it, because that's where we think we add value by saying, oh, well, I saw this. Well, this would mean that you should do this. When not necessarily, it could be something completely different to that individual. Like I said, the red, if I see red, and to me it means anger, and to you it means passion and love, and I say, oh, well, all I saw was red, and you were dressed in red, and there was red all around you, and wow, you have so much anger. Like maybe you need to, I think you need to, like, work on your anger and forgiveness maybe. When to the other person, if I just said, you're just dressed in red, to them it could mean like, oh, well, I'm overflowing with love, right? Or I'm overflowing with love for myself or for others or for somebody else or whatever. Or I'm vibrant and happy, or I'm that's my goal or my focus. Those are two very different messages, right? And it's the same thing, between two people that are discussing it. So that's something to look at as well. And then when we go into these, once we get into this consciousness, then the next step, we get into is, well, what is it, my purpose? Like, what is it I'm supposed to be doing? Supposed to be, by the way, is another ego term. And we sit there and talk about what we think. And now this is ego. When I say I think this, it comes from ego, right? What we think is what we're supposed to be doing to serve humanity. And that always has to do with, oh, I have to be sacrificing myself, or I have to be giving myself up for this, or I have to be, giving up everything to help these people or this person or these animals or whatever. And what I always share with others as my understanding is, listen to your heart first, because we put so much effort and energy into trying to define what I'm supposed to be doing and serving the world, right? That's an egoic thing, because then the expectation from that is that I'm going to feel better about myself and I'm going to be a good person because I do that, because I serve the world or I serve other people that way. Very, very smart hidden ego thing there. So what I always tell people is, find what's in your heart and what makes you sing, what makes your heart sing, that you could do 24/7, 24 hours a day, and be totally happy doing it. It wouldn't be work. It wouldn't be hard. And of course, you might need to do a couple of things or shift your life or do some things so that you could do that. But what is it that really makes you feel giddy when you do it? And that is how you listen to what the path is for you to realize your purpose, your true, higher purpose. Because when you do embody that, when you allow yourself to be that whatever, to be that bliss, then the universe will conspire to support you. And you hold this vibration when you allow yourself to expose, to embody, and to share your bliss. Then what you do is you hold this vibration of that allows others around you to do it. And that is the best way for us to serve the world. That is the best way for us to serve each other, is to be the best and happiest of who in our authentic self and our bliss, and embody that, because people around you just can't help but feel better when you're in that vibration. And then they want to do it themselves. I've had somebody just the other day, say to me, I was doing a house clearing, and she said, I am just tingly sitting near you. It was very funny. She goes, do people tell you that? She goes, I think it's your energy. She goes, oh, I feel so good around you. I feel so happy. And I said, well, thank you. I said, yeah, actually, do people do say that? Yeah, and thank you. And all it is me being in a place of, I love what I do. I love exploring this remembrance. I love helping others to do that too. And I love all kinds of facets of sharing and us playing in the playground together, right? So there's that's where we naturally will sit in that place. For years, I thought I wanted to do something, and it had to do with the picture of what somebody I was speaking to today who said, well, I always thought I wanted the American dream. And it asked 10 people what the American dream is. It's 10 different things. Okay. And so we are taught this is the American dream. And so that's what we should strive for. Well, and I sort of had that too, by the way, when I was younger. Janice says a hammock by the lake is my bliss, but no bugs. Well, I might just have to join you there. But I like the ocean. Well, I like big lakes too, but the ocean too. But anyhow, anyhow, what was I going to say? So the American dream. So, I grew up in a divorce household, a single mom, a very female dominated household. It was just me and my mom, my sister, my grandmother, my grandfather, my great grandmother. So there was one man and all these women, and very strong, independent women. And it was always, there was something missing. There was something not missing. There was some, back in the 70s where I was growing up, I was taught to believe there was something missing because so few people had households where the parents were divorced at the time. So as a kid, I thought, like my best friend who lived next door at the time, like she had the very nuclear family and the very, happy parents and 4 kids, and the grandma lives with her, and there was a very close family. And I just thought, oh, I really want that. And so I grew up, and then I was like, okay, so how do I get that? Well, first I'm gonna be independent and strong and self-supportive, which is what I did. That was my whole focus in my younger age. And then I met my husband and we got married, and we had our 2 kids, and then the picket fence and the house and the dogs and the cats, and and that's what it was supposed to look like, right? Then at one point I realized it's really not what was making me happy. And I left corporate, and that's when I started to really look at finding out who I am and what really brings me, what allows me to embody the happiness, right? I wasn't happy there. Like, I had done really well, by the way, I'd done really well there, but I realized I wasn't happy. And my husband was really supportive of that. So like a lot of times it breaks up marriages and everything else, but actually at the end, it was bumpy for a while. It really has made our communication very much stronger because we come to the place of authenticity, come from the place of authenticity to be open and free to explore who and what it is that allows us to be in that bliss, right? And to let go of what the American dream idea is, well, I don't have to have the cookie cutter house with the white picket fence and all this kind of stuff. I don't have to do this, and I don't have to, like, I've had people come in and see me, and I remember this one woman who's had this fabulous, exciting life. Like, she lived in San Francisco, and she had so much of a story and a book in there with her, and yet she came and she sat with me, and she was like, I hate myself, or I'm really unhappy with myself. And I was like, why? And she said, well, because I'm not like my sister. And she's like, well, my sister has she's she was some kind of doctor or whatever, and then she was married to another professional, and then they had the kids and the picket fence and the dog. And she goes, and I'm just the loser that didn't make anything of myself. And I'm like, except look at all the excitement you've had. Look at all the vibrance in your life. So I'm not saying that she's wrong or right. I'm saying that this is right for you, and that's okay. It doesn't have to look like everybody else. And that's one of the things that is true for what it is for us to embody our bliss, as well as what it is for us to, like, how we live in our situation, in our families, and whether we're alone or with somebody else, whether we have dogs or cats or lizards or whatever. And when we decide to really take the path of that true spiritual calling, which is really to follow our bliss, to follow what it is that allows us to really embody the best of who we can be, our true potential, that's really, to me, that's like the goal, because who wouldn't want to be happy 24/7? And yeah, of course, we still have bumps along the way. There's still the human experience. We still have relationships, and there's always, that kind of stuff when you have interaction. But it's when we come from a place where I'm like, okay, I love what I do. I'm totally happy with what I do, and all the situations that form around that, I can deal with in such a much more strong, solid, authentic way, because that's where I am within myself. So that has everything to do with, it has everything to do with both the active spiritual journey, and it has everything to do with what you do with your life. So there's no right or wrong. It's only what's right, what's only what works for you in terms of embracing that happiness, finding your rhythm, and allowing yourself to really just be you. Like I always say, you do you. I'm going to do me, you do you, because That's the only way. That's where not the only way. That's the way we get to a much higher consciousness and a much more unified, love-based way of living. So that's all I have to say for this week. It's a lot of stuff. It's just been a conversation that's been come up a lot, and I talk about this a lot in my classes and things like that. But when we start from there, then everything else flows so much more easily. And instead of spending all this energy trying to prove somebody wrong or say, oh my God, I can't believe she does this way, and God, that's so ancient, or that's so limiting, because we do. And my friend Jen, and she's not here right now, but she always says, she's like, yeah. She goes, when we have that voice inside that goes, well, I'm so spiritual. We get to that place where we realize, no, we all have our own things, and we will shift and change and continue, and we will use tools and different things until we don't need them anymore. And the key is to keep shifting, keep focusing on that inner voice to get to the place of trusting it, because when we come from there, from a place of love and bliss, then we have nothing to do but naturally shed all these things that we take on as other people's judgments and opinions and all that other kind of stuff. So that's your home plate for this week. Look in the mirror and see where you're not doing that, because majority of us still do a majority of that in our lives and experience. And see if we can just shift ourselves to stop saying you should, you can't, you need to, you mustn't. Like, just be conscious of those words to start with, especially to yourself, and especially when others say it to you. When you step back and say, so does this serve me from a place of love? Am I happy doing this? Does it really fill me up, in a way that is strong and authentic and unified? And believe me, there's a lot to do with that. So start with that. And in the meantime, we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining me. This is Angela Coulter signing off with this week's Living the Show. Have a good one.